Hi, welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson. Today we're talking to Penny Griffiths-Morgan, who's a paranormal author and podcaster based in Chelmsford, Essex. How are you, Penny?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Now, Penny is the author of My Haunted History and more recently, only just a couple of months ago, My Haunted Experiment. Now, we asked her to come along because a lot of the stuff in there is, I think, is quite new and quite innovative, and I'd like to talk to you about that. You seem to be very, very focused on the history of hauntings, not just the bump in the night. You want to know what was happening that night that
Yes.
led to the bump.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it, actually. Yeah.
How did you first get interested in the paranormal?
Well, I actually mentioned this in the first book, My Haunted History, that I'd always had an interest in it. And it was as a kid, I was probably about 8 or 9. My late sister and I were walking the dog in the village where we grew up, actually in Norfolk, and there was this old barn. And we always used to sort of dare each other to look through the door because it was one of those spooky sort of things that kids do.
Yeah.
You know, the cottage that the old witch used to live at and all that kind of thing. And there was one day we were looking at it, and there was this glowing light that was moving around the barn. And the only thing I can compare it to is Tinkerbell from Peter Pan.
Yeah.
The way it was flying around there was no light coming into the barn that could have caused it. We don't have like glowing insects like that in the UK, like other countries might have. But the weirdest thing was it flew up to in front of us where we were looking through the sort of panels in the door, hovered, and then flew away. And I don't know how long it took. I mean, I can't remember, but I just remember my sister and I both just standing there, sort of going. It was one of those things. It took our breath away for when it happened. And also the house I grew up in, even though it wasn't old or anything like that, it was built in the 60s. Things used to happen there that I couldn't explain. Like my dad used to work away, and I remember one day. One evening, all of us, my sister, my mum and I, are all sitting in the living room watching television, and I see a shadow of a figure walk past the glass door that was like our living room door, and I heard the creak as it went up the stairs. Things like that. And so, yeah, that's kind of, I've always thought there is something out there, shall we say, that we can't explain.
So when did you actually start actively looking for that thing that was out there?
Properly, not until relatively recently. I mean, I've always been interested in it. If I went into a place, but it was very sort of slapdash the way I did it. You know, if I'd pick up on things, or I'd sort of trust my gut feeling on places. But it was actually, I never knew you could do investigating. I never knew because I didn't hang around with people who did it. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm a financial advisor by trade. I used to play rugby. I rode horses. Nobody I knew did that kind of thing. And it was actually the story I tell. It was about 7 years ago. I was night feeding my then baby, and I was flicking through the television channels, and I caught Ghost Asylum with the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. And once I learned the accent and I could understand them, I thought, wow, this looks quite good fun. Next morning, I started Googling paranormal investigators looking for trainees, and it kind of went from there. But because I'd already had an idea of what to do, but using my senses rather than equipment, it was quite a fast learning curve. And ironically now, I can class a few of the guys from Tennessee Wraith Chasers as friends because I managed to interview them, and now I know them firsthand, and I love telling them this story because they don't believe me.
Well, it's good. I mean, we're all influenced by different types of people, and I've certainly done that myself. So the two books you've got, My Haunted History, is, as we said before, is more focused on the history of hauntings. Well, not the history of hauntings, but the history behind different hauntings.
It came about because obviously I have a podcast called Haunted Histories, which excuse me, I've been doing now for over 3 years. Originally it was with Parasearch Radio. They stopped earlier this year, and it's now moved on to Paranormal UK Radio. And the whole premise of Haunted Histories was to interview people about a paranormal experience, and then to look at the history of it and see if we can find anything that fits. So can I, some of their experiences, can I give them historical relevance and historical accuracy for that experience? And people kept saying to me, you should put this in a book. You do so much research for each show. I mean, we're looking at 8 to 10 hours worth of research minimum per show. You should use that. And I was like, nah, no one's going to want to hear that. And then I thought, well, actually, a lot of these places I have had my own experiences at. So I came up with the idea of doing 10 different places, doing the history as I would normally, but also then what my experiences have been investigating them. And that's really where it came about. It was just, so it was kind of my show, but in book form, with me as the guest each week.
You seem quite interested in sort of the army aspect of it. I mean, the one I like is SAS headquarters.
Military,
in the military, and you had a really cool experience there. Do you want to maybe reveal that one?
Yeah. Well, Highlands House is in Chelmsford in Essex. So anyone who does investigating will know that when you're only investigating 15 minutes from home, that 3 a.m. drive back is great when you're literally just whizzing straight up the main road. I had a lot of people very jealous of me that night.
Yeah.
Highlands House is also where V Festival used to take place, and the grounds itself and the house has had this amazing history. It was, it was a prisoner of war camp, as actually a lot of Chelmsford was POW camps during World War II. It was a World War I VAD hospital. In fact, the guy who owned the house made all the bedside cabinets for all the patients himself. Amazing place. But one of the things it was, and it was kind of folklore in Chelmsford, it was the SAS HQ. And the then SAS leader who took over after David Stirling was captured was a chap by the name of Paddy Mayne, who was a bit of a nutty Irishman. And he's meant to have driven a jeep up the internal stairs of the house. I found out this was actually true. I found out the accounts. It's not urban myth. It's true. But one of the things, my nickname is the military magnet. Anywhere I go, if there's military there, they will come through and talk to me. I don't know why, whether it's my love of the history, whether maybe in a past life I was just something to do with it. Don't know. And I remember we were sitting in a group, and it was a public investigation. It wasn't a private one. And they were using like a portal device. And the words penny corporal, penny corporal, penny corporal kept coming through. And I was like, all right, whatever, I'll come back later if you want. Yes. Okay, so I went back to this room later on in the evening with just one other person who's also a historian. And we had novelists. And we said, hi, we're back. What's your name? And the words that came up were Corporal Terry Knott, Kont. And I was like, wow, that's pretty precise. And then I said, did you die in World War what? World War II, sorry. And he said, yes, Europe. And then didn't talk to us anymore. But I made a note of this. Now, with hindsight, I wish I'd taken a photo, but at the time I wrote it down. A couple of days later, and I'm going to refer to the book for this one because I can't always remember the actual details, if that's all right.
That's fine,
but, I started looking it up, and I found in the military records a Corporal, John Terence Knott, who died, I think it was 1945 in World War II. And what was even more interesting is his records are vague, to say the least, even though he'd been in the military a long time. And the battle he had actually died in, when I started looking up the history of the battles, was actually a SAS battle. And then what was even more interesting was that he was actually down as a Royal Marine Commando. And anyone who knows about the SAS, especially the World War II SAS, or L Detachment as they were known, all their recruits came from 7, 9 and 11 Royal Marine Commandos. And his service number was PLY/X2791. And it was actually the 7th of April, 1945 he died. And when I found that, to say I had goosebumps, in fact, I'm getting them now telling the story, I had goosebumps because I can't prove he was SAS. I can't prove it, but everything fits. And to find the name and for it to fit with the history is why I do what I do.
It's very interesting because I mean, a lot of times you hear you people that'll do investigations and they'll it's so vague it could be anything really. And you've actually got a person's name, a first name, not like Mary, who's Mary, sort of thing. This is a Terry Knott, that you think. Have you done any further investigation in this fellow?
Not been able to find a dicky bird. I even got a couple of historian friends who are researchers, same as me. Nothing. All his records are shut. We know he existed. We know he got injured and subsequently died as a result of this battle. I have actually got the name of the battle as well. That's it. That's all we've got. Which talking to someone I know who is current special forces, he said that doesn't surprise him because
Yeah,
if especially if this guy was special forces, even though he would have been classed as being on secondment as opposed to being part of the
yeah.
SAS, we wouldn't know anything about him. But yeah, I can't find anything else that mentions him other than he definitely existed, his service number, and the fact he's buried in North Germany.
What do you think that does for the investigation you did? I mean, it's a very, very significant piece of
Mm.
information that, most people will never get during a paranormal investigation.
Some people still argue it with me. They still say, "Oh, it's just luck of the draw." I'm sorry, there's luck and there's luck.
Yeah. Or even if
Um,
it is lucky you got it, but you got it.
I got it, yeah. Or that it was just the name fitted, and I've managed to find someone. I mean, someone whose name is John Terence Knott cannot, if you pardon the pun, be that common. It can't.
No.
Um, yes, all right. His records doesn't say he was attached to L detachment, but none of them did. The only ones that do are the officers, like the Paddy Mains and the David Sterlings and all of that we know about. The grunts, as I would call them, they very rarely, unless they've told people afterwards. Well, he couldn't tell people he died.
No. And they're probably
And
not going to open. They're not opening records unless people ask for them to be opened. And
I can't
probably.
find them anywhere. They're all closed. I mean, I did try contacting the MOD records, and they went, "Nope, you can't have them." So
I
maybe in
suppose
another 20 years I'll get hold of them if I want to. But
maybe. Yeah.
it,
I mean,
it just made me think that. I mean, somebody said, "Why you? Why do you get this stuff?" And I said, "Perhaps it's because I sit and listen. I don't." I don't go into an investigation going rah rah. I'm here. I don't go all sort of rah rah. I'm here. Talk to me, demons. Woo. I literally just sit and go. I people watch. I listen. I chat. Um, I did an investigation recently with Jane Harris at Ettington Park Hotel, and somebody came afterwards and said, "Why were you asking the questions you asked? They're very left of field. They're very strange." And I said, "Because that's what came to me," and they all got replies. I said, "You go into a place asking the, did you live here? Did you die here? What's your name?" People are going to go, "Oh, not again. I've been getting answers for the last 30 years. Give me something new." And I
yeah.
just, because I'm used to talking to people in my day job, I just treat it like that. And it
Yeah.
seems to work.
Yeah. Do you look up the history before you go into an investigation, or do you wait till afterwards? What's your practice?
Without sounding arrogant, I normally know a bit before I go in, just from what I do with all the books. I mean, I write for Haunted Magazine. I have blogs every week. I do research pieces for other groups. They pay me to do the research for them. So a lot of the
Yeah.
times, and there's so much crossover in these places, I don't look up specifics before I go in. So I'll know, say, for example, if somewhere was a workhouse, one of my favourite things, if somewhere was a
Yeah.
workhouse, I'll know roughly what it would have been like to be there. I would probably know when this one opened, how many people it had room for, just from general knowledge. But I wouldn't necessarily have looked up what the masters' names were, or when it shut, or anything like that. So those are the things I look up afterwards. Yeah,
Do you consider yourself mediumistic?
sensitive to things, very much so.
That's,
Apparently, I've been told I could convert that to being more of a medium than just a sensitive. Um, but no, I definitely pick up on things that then I'll be thinking, I'll write it down without speaking, and then the medium next
yeah.
to me is doing exactly the same thing. So
Yeah.
I must have something going on. But that's another thing I think I've always had, but I pushed it to one side. It's only in the last sort of 5 years that I've gone, okay, come on, talk to
Yeah,
me.
you've
Let
sort
me.
of almost found your calling almost. You're waiting
Mm,
for something, and this is. No, I'd always just say that you talk to a lot of mediums who don't want to know what's going on in a place before they walk in.
mm,
But if you're going into somewhere, an SAS headquarters, which is what you were doing in the first place,
yeah,
whether you know the bloke's name, who was the bloke on the door, that's irrelevant. You're still going to know that you're in a military headquarters, so
yeah.
therefore there's going to be certain things would have happened in there.
But how can I influence a novelist? I
Yeah,
can't influence a novelist. It's not like the names came to me in my head and I wrote them down. They came up on a screen. Now, I mean, that's one of the things I say to people. If I'd been sitting there and saying, "Oh, this name's coming to me," yes, that would be easy to fake. I'm sorry, it is. But these words came up on a novelist.
yeah,
It wasn't and I know it's what a 1 in 1,000 possibility, but what's the possibility of the exact right names coming up that fit?
Have you ever sort of like? I remember we did an investigation, me and some people I knew, about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was in a pub here in London, and the pub had its own sort of sign on the wall that that this Mary had blah blah
Mhm.
blah, and it was during this and all that sort of history on there. Now it took my mate about John Kaneko James about I don't know about 5 minutes of Wikipedia to work out that just didn't work out because it was in the wrong time frame. It was different, different eras, all the sorts of things,
Yeah.
all the things that were wrong with that, and so therefore investigation. When we found things, but just
Mm.
wasn't what they wanted. But
Yeah,
when
that's something that I've picked up on quite a few times. And I mean, what I normally find is I'll look at a website for somewhere. I mean, when I am researching, it's not just a case of go on Wikipedia and that's it. Wikipedia is great as a prompt.
I'm not saying
If
that John did it. This was just almost. I'm saying that
but no,
it was so easy to debunk that you only had to go to
yes,
Wikipedia to look out that the Duke of whatever was not alive
yeah.
at that stage.
Yeah, yeah. But the point I'm making is people think that I
Yeah,
just go to Wikipedia and then read out Wikipedia. No, there's an awful lot more to it. I like primary source material, so
yeah,
newspapers, birth certificates, census records, all that kind of thing. And there's quite a few times when I've read a write-up of a place and they say, "Oh, this was built in 1836," and I'm looking at it going, well, that's weird because the Land Registry said it's 1864. And I'll look up these, but then you'll see all the other websites copying the details that another
yeah,
website's put, and you think, well, I can't change them all. A big example is I did a show earlier this year on Asylum 49 in America in Tooele in Utah, and the history on that, people say, oh yeah, it was previously owned by one of the founding fathers of Tooele, blah blah blah. And I look at the building, and you can see there's no way this building would have been 1800s.
mm,
And talking to the owner, and I said, I'm sorry, but I'm going to debunk this. It's not true. And she went, yeah, we found that. I found that out a few years ago. I've been trying to change the history, but people won't budge because a medium said he lived here. Well,
yeah,
she said, we've got the maps. This was wasteland when
yeah.
he was around. So there's things like that that I'm trying to do, but doing it, people get very, very sensitive and protective when you say, well, actually, that fact, it's not fact. It's something that someone's come up with and not verified. And a lot of the times it is because a medium has taken the information they've been given and maybe has put two and two together and come up with five. I'm not slagging mediums. I've done some great work with mediums, but sometimes it's misinterpreted that they're getting signals and the signals are misinterpreted. So that's really what I'm trying to do. It's trying to say, well, look, if we work together, so you have the historian working with the medium, working with the scientific investigator, if we all work together, we'll come out with some pretty darn good information at the end of it that's been academically checked, if you
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. No. I find that interesting because it's what you are essentially doing is you are going in and trying to find the real history behind
Mm,
these things, and therefore I think it makes it more powerful the
mm,
story that you come out with
yeah,
afterwards because it's just not made up.
no.
Now you've now your next book was Haunted Experiments. Can you tell us about that? Now I understand it was
That
you
one.
basically that one there. You were looking at how other paranormal investigators and researchers work, and you were trying to replicate maybe some of what they'd achieved.
Yeah, it really came about. I was at a Daily Mail photo shoot with some other amazing ladies in the business, people like Hazel Ford, MJ Dixon, people like that. And I was listening to them talk, and they were talking about all these different experiments. And I was like, where can I learn more about the background to these? Because I kind of understand how to do them, but I want to know where they came from, what's their origin, what was the thought process behind the inventor? And they gave me a few details like Rowdy Eve and play people like that. And I thought this would be a good book because I guarantee there's loads of books. There's some great people out there that will tell you how to do them. Beth Darlington, Sarah Chimasero, so obviously other Aussies, lots of English people, British people, American people, whatever. But there's not many that say this is where it came from. And I thought, well, let's write one that shows a bit where they came from because everything's got a history.
Can you give us
Doesn't
an
matter.
example of one? Can you give us an example of one of those?
Yeah, so I thought I'd look at four different experiments that are common experiments. The first one was the Philip experiment, which is where, I don't know if you can see on the cover, that drawing there. Um, and the Philip experiment was one that was actually conducted over, I think it was Canada, off the top of my head, in the sort of early 70s. And the theory behind it was, can we conjure up, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but can we
Yeah.
conjure up a spirit? Yep. Can we literally, using loads of brains and minds, if you like, conjure up a spirit? So they came up with this backstory. They made a drawing of this Philip. And let me say, some of the historical stuff in his backstory is not not correct, but anyway, bye. And they wanted to see if they could conjure a spirit, using a group conscious to conjure a spirit. It's hard to say what their conclusion was, because they did have stuff, and they did sound analysis on the taps they had and everything else that said, well, these weren't produced by a human, like doing that sort of thing. It was otherworldly. But then they tried it with some other kind of conjured spirits, and it wasn't quite as good. And my sort of theory on it was, well, how do we not know that the spirits are literally waiting? They want to talk. If they're sentient beings, they want to talk to someone. How do we not know that there was somebody there whose name wasn't Philip, but it was Peter? And Peter goes, oh, they're asking for a Philip. Damn it, that's close enough. I'm coming through. Because we've all been called the wrong name before. And how many times do we say, actually, no, my name's this? I've been called Jenny, Peggy, Polly. And I tend to still answer because I know it's me they're talking to. And then afterwards I say, look, by the way, it's Penny. Yeah. And how do we not know that's not what was happening? So I thought, well, let's try it. Let's try this one. So that drawing was actually done by a very talented friend of my husband who was a bit worried that by doing that he was going to get haunted. And I created a backstory, and I won't give too much detail because it's all in the book. And it was of an American airman, and we were going to use it at RAF Tibenham in Norfolk. One of the other ones I used was the Estes method, which is quite a modern one, but it has its background in other things. And I got an interview actually with Carl Pfeiffer, who was one of the creators in the book. I also looked at the triggers, like Singapore theory, which is one of my favourites to do, and EVPs. And although with things like EVPs, I could write a whole 40,000 words on the history of EVPs, I stuck it to about 4,000. So people got an idea of, and I listed different works they could read if they were interested in digging into it even more. And some of those experiences that people had were quite interesting in just the developing EVPs. But then I took them and I took 3 locations to try out some of it, just not properly, like scientifically try them out, but just okay, let's see what's going to work. And I can tell you from my research, triggers were the most immediate things to work. But you'd have to read the book to find out what the others happened.
Of course. We're not giving it away for free.
Oh, so. No. It took me a long time, that did.
It did. So how are you keeping yourself busy during we're still in lockdown. I still think we're in lockdown. I know it's, some of the shops are open a bit more, but we're still in lockdown. What are you doing to keep yourself busy? Because we can't go out to these haunted locations at the moment.
I am researching my backside off, David. I am writing, because of Parasearch shutting and me going over to Paranormal UK Radio, I've gone kind of now on my own, if that makes sense. So I set up a Facebook page called Haunted Histories, set up a website called Haunted Histories, I've set up a YouTube channel, and I'm trying to put loads of content on there to kind of, not without sounding arrogant, educate people, but say I'm doing a new blog each week. I'm trying to sort of write a load of articles ready for Haunted magazines so that they've got a nice stable of articles for me to choose from. I am writing and researching, my next book, which is going to be on the British Schools Museum in Hitchin. And I'm trying to do all the history and research stuff so that when I'm ready to go out, I can get in there to do the investigation bit. And it's just lots of research. And obviously I do a podcast every 2 weeks, which is a good 8 to 10 hours worth of research every time. So it's trying to do all of this while I can so that when we're allowed back out again, I can just go.
I just wonder what it's going to be like when life goes back to whatever normal looks like after this, if we're going to have enough time to do all the things we're doing at the moment, because we are all researching and interviewing and doing all sorts of things.
I would say that between you and I think there's going to be a lot of like Facebook Lives and podcasts that have started during the lockdown that may not carry on. I've done one for 3 years, so for me, it's nothing new. If that makes sense, it's not.
Spooky Isles is coming up to its 10th anniversary, so we're not going anywhere. No, in the next year, we're not that far away from it. But yes, so I mean, we're not going anywhere. So, but you're right. There is a lot going on at the moment, and it's fun, and people are getting into it, and we're seeing some new things.
It's great. But I also think there's going to be more people finding out they actually quite enjoy the research side. And they actually quite enjoy the reading side, the analysis side. And, you don't actually have to be out investigating 24/7 to be of benefit, to be of use to the paranormal world. You can be one of those people who sits behind a desk, reading stuff, spotting stuff, analysing stuff. Everyone is needed. It's not... everyone doesn't have to be, your Zach Bagans or your Nick Groff or your Katrina Weidman or whatever. We need us geeks in the background doing their bit as well to validate it, to make it tangible to the general public.
Make it interesting, because the fact is, by itself, hearing a creak means nothing and it's boring.
Yeah.
But if you know why that creak happened, well, that's where the cool stuff happens.
Well, let me give you a quick example of that. Everyone sort of says about pipes tapping, and the common thing is, no, it's just the water going through, making the pipe expand and everything. Well, when I did Gresson Hall Workhouse, I heard these pipes tapping. And so I just put it down to, I carried on chatting away as though there was a spirit that was on my own. And I actually spoke to a plumber friend of mine. He was asking me all about it. And I said, how long does it take? 'Cause I found out the heating had been switched off since the September, and this was like the January. And I said, how long does it take for the pipes to stop creaking and flexing? And he went, 72 hours. I said, so if I heard definite tapping and noises on pipes, is it going to be the heating? Because it was the heating pipes. And he went, no. So finding out things like that, that's like, that is like, oh, okay, that's quite cool. But you've got to ask the question.
See, if you were taps, you wouldn't be asking that question, because they're all plumbers, aren't they? So it's so there are benefits in not all just being financial advisors or whatever it be. People come with all sorts of knowledge to paranormal.
That's right. I mean, I'm very good friends with Wes Coleman from Canada, who's Correction Officers Paranormal Society. He is a corrections officer. So when we did Bodmin Jail with him for Richard Estep's new book, his knowledge of what a prison should be like and what you can do to really rile up prisoners if you want to was invaluable. And it was weird because he was clicking keys as though he was at work, and the activity was going berserk. So it's everyone is needed. There's no person who's the wrong fit, shall we say.
Yeah, so these are all the things we learn, and I'm really impressed. You've got the two books, and I think they show two sides of the sort of the same coin. Basically, You're talking about the history, but you're also talking about the practical side about how you can actually test it.
Yes.
And I think that's very, very interesting. So I'd certainly like to talk to you again at some stage about some of the experiments and some of the other things you do. So anyway, thank you for talking to us today. We'll definitely put all the links to all the new haunted histories down in the below, and we'll look forward to checking out your next podcast as well.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much for your time.
I know. See, I was going to say Polly, Penny, Peggy, but you'll answer
Jenny,
to anything.
I'll answer to anything, yeah.
Anyway,
Essex girl,
Essex
weirdo.
girl.
Yeah.
All right. See you later then. Bye-bye.
Bye.